Hey folks, today we're gonna look at some practice productivity ideas. And in this video, I wanna show you some ways of structuring your practice sessions to maximize your practice time and to help make you a more well-rounded musician. First, we're gonna look at the three main enemies to practice productivity. These are the things that keep us back in the long run from actually doing what we wanna do in music. Then we'll look at ways of structuring and planning out your practice sessions using some helpful categories to make sure that we're actually practicing the right things to get better. Next, we'll look at some time management ideas to help keep us on track here. And lastly, we're just gonna look at my practice week. I wanna share with you what I'll be practicing every day this upcoming week, how I'm dividing my time between all these topics, and how I'm using this structure as a way of accomplishing my musical goals. And we're getting started right now. If you're new here to the channel, my name's David and I'm a mandolin performer, instructor, and overall enthusiast, I guess. And just a disclaimer up front here about this video, I don't want to insinuate that music should feel like work ever, or that you have to be productive or efficient in your practice hours to be a good musician. I'm just speaking from my own personal experience because I know that I enjoy music more and I enjoy practicing more whenever I'm making creative output or seeing real progress in my growth as a musician. And maybe you're like that too if you're watching a video with a title like this. And the big reason that I'm talking about this topic right now is because this is something I really want to get better at this year. If you haven't heard, my big goal for 2021 is to practice at least 2 hours a day, every day without exception. And to make things interesting, I'm pledging to donate money to charitable organizations at the end of each month if I don't meet my daily practice quota. I know it's a pretty weird idea, but I hope it'll help kick my tail into gear and also help raise some support and awareness for some great causes out there. So I'm about 2 weeks into this goal now, and to be honest, it's been pretty challenging. There's been more than one day that I've just squeaked in my 2 hours right before midnight, but I've been able to make it so far, and it's actually been cool because I've been seeing a lot of progress. Even just a few days into the goal, I was noticing a lot of improvement in the areas that I was working on, and that's always kind of surprising to me. It's like, wow, if I actually practice every day like every music teacher I've ever had has ever told me, then I'll actually get better, and it's probably gonna take a lot less time than I think it will. Which brings us to the first and foremost enemy of practice productivity, which is basically not practicing or not practicing enough. And if you think about it, it's kind of obvious, right? Because the less you have your instrument in hand, the fewer opportunities you're gonna have to get better. And conversely, the more you have your instrument in hand, the more opportunities you have to be productive. You may have heard about the 10,000 hour principle, right? And it's just this idea that you basically have to put in that amount of time and sweat equity into whatever you're working on to become a master. Not to say that we all have to become masters to enjoy music or to get better, but there is some truth to that idea where you have to invest regular amounts of time into your craft to actually get better at what you're doing. There's no get rich quick scheme to becoming a great musician, I guess, if that makes sense even. So that's what we gotta do. We gotta practice consistently, and it's way better to practice consistently every day for a small amount of time than to practice inconsistently for a large amount of time every few days. Because what we wanna do is to almost create some compounding interest where we're building on our experience and our learning from the day before, instead of having to almost restart or catch up from those stagnant periods in between sessions. And I know this seems like an impossible task, right? To make room in our busy lives to practice every day. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, we could all make room in our schedules if we wanted to. I did kind of an interesting experiment recently where for a whole week, I wrote down everything that I did with my time throughout the day. So every minute was accounted for. And at the end of the week, I looked back and realized how much faffing about there really is in my day-to-day life, whether it's scrolling through social media or needlessly checking emails, or even watching productivity videos like this, I'm ashamed to say. There were hours of wasted time that I could have been using towards benefiting my future self, like playing mandolin. And maybe you're better at doing more meaningful things with your time than I am, but I think we all have a little fat to trim that we could be using towards something like playing music. It all just boils down to whether or not we make practice a priority and we have the diligence to actually follow through. And it doesn't have to be 2 hours. It could just be 1 hour. It could be 30 minutes, even 15 minutes a day. Can you find 15 minutes in your day to practice mandolin? So the quantity of time spent with your instrument is the first factor of productivity here, but then we have to ask ourselves, what is the quality of that time that we're spending, right? Which brings us to the second enemy of practice productivity, which is distraction. In my daily 2-hour practice sessions so far, there have definitely been some days that have been more productive than others. And there could be a number of things that are contributing to this, but I know one main culprit for sure. That's right, I'm talking about this guy right here. Your smartphone can be a great practice tool, right? I use this for my metronome, for transcribing music, for listening to music, for time management when I'm practicing. But as soon as there's one message or notification, a ding or a buzz, I'm just taken out of that learning moment. And when we're practicing, we really want to get into this deep flow state where we almost lose track of time and our surroundings and get totally absorbed into whatever we're playing. That's when I enjoy playing music the most, and I feel like I'm making the most progress. So what I do is I just leave this thing on Do Not Disturb pretty much all the time. And I'll even turn Wi-Fi off sometimes when I'm practicing, because I don't want that extra temptation to scroll or to check my emails and get sucked away from what I'm doing. I know that probably infuriates my friends because it means I'm really hard to get a hold of sometimes. And maybe that sounds a bit extreme, but that's kind of what I have to do to give myself a fighting chance of having a productive practice session. And I'd encourage you to examine your practice sessions in the past to see what those distractions are for you. And then see if you can hedge your practice sessions from those distractions so that you can stack the deck in favor of your progress. So we've talked about the quantity and the quality of our practice time, but that brings us to our last enemy of practice productivity, which is content selection. So if we come back to that 10,000 hour principle, right? Imagine if we played nothing but old Joe Clark for that amount of time. And even though no one would ever do that, right? I can't tell you the amount of times that I've sat down to practice and just played stuff that I already know how to play. The same old stuff, which definitely isn't productive, right? Or on the other extreme, I'll find my varied musical interests pulling me in 1,000 different directions at once, which means that I won't be able to finish all those projects or devote enough time to each topic on my list, which definitely is inefficient and unproductive too. So maybe you can relate to either of those. The solution to this issue and to all of those enemies of practice productivity is just to be proactive and diligent in planning out what you want to accomplish in your practice sessions ahead of time. And before your eyes glaze over here, just hear me out, because this doesn't have to be drudgery or forced labor. For example, back when Mile 12 was touring a lot before all this happened, we would always come up with these games or challenges to help motivate each other to practice more, even amongst all the challenges of living life on the road. And I remember one day our banjo player BB came up with this awesome mnemonic device to help structure her daily practice routine. It was an acronym for the word SWIFT, and if I remember it correctly, S stood for singing, W stood for writing, I was for improvising, F, is my favorite, stood for fast, just playing at fast tempos, and then the T stood for transcribing. It became kind of this infamous, funny catchphrase amongst the band, like, have you gotten your Swift in today? But it was pretty ingenious in a way, because all of those topics lined up with BB's long-term goals, and this word created a simple but memorable way of accountability for her to tackle all those topics without losing steam or getting sidetracked. And it's working for her because she's killing it. I don't know if you heard, but shout out to BB for winning that Steve Martin Banjo Award. Now, I'm not saying that we all have to come up with acronyms for our personal practice sessions, but we do have to find a plan that works for us to help avoid those unproductive pitfalls. If you're new to practice planning like this, I know it can be a bit daunting at first, but a great place to start is just to establish some tried and true musical categories for your practice sessions. That way you're covering all your bases in your day-to-day practice life. That's something that Gerald Klickstein talks a lot about in this book, The Musician's Way, which if you haven't read, I definitely recommend. I'll drop a link in the description below. This book outlines a lot of helpful information on how to practice deeply, as Gerald calls it. And one of the things that he starts off with is this idea of the 5 practice zones that you should be hitting in every practice session. And those 5 zones are new material, so brand new stuff that you're working on. Then you have developing material, tunes that still need work on memorization or technique to be able to perform them. Then you have the performance material category, which is songs that you feel pretty ready to record or perform that you're just brushing up on. And then you have technique, which is scales, arpeggios, or any instrument-specific thing that you're working on. And then lastly, musicianship, which includes sight reading, theory or ear training, composition, listening and study, and so forth. And that's a pretty good template to start with. And I like how all the categories are weighted towards playing real music, to expanding your repertoire, and to brushing up on songs that you already know to perform. But all these categories are really essential to the growth of a developing musician, so I'd include all of these in your daily practice sessions. But the biggest consideration here when using a template like this or making a plan of your own is to make sure that whatever plan you settle on is actually helping you towards your long-term musical goals. Because if you're not chipping away at those goals day by day in your practice sessions, then you're never actually going to get there, right? By the way, I did an entire video just on this one topic on how to set musical goals. If you haven't seen it, check it out at the link above before going any further here. Because what we're going to do now is we're actually going to come up with a practice plan for the week ahead, and we're going to use our goals as targets, but then we're going to use that 5-zone system as a filter to sort our goals into to make sure that our daily practice routines are pretty balanced. So grab a pen and paper and let's do this together. And instead of talking about this abstractly for everyone, I just want to show you what this looks like for me. So what I try to do each week is sit down Sunday evening and just methodically and logically plan out what I want to accomplish in that week in my practice sessions. But first, I want to revisit my goals. And just like I had to do in that previous video, here are my top 3 long-term goals for 2021. First, I just want to get better at playing up and down the neck still. That's something I still need a lot of work on. Next, I really want to expand my repertoire a lot more this year. And lastly, I'm trying to compose a lot more music too. I'd like to make a new record this year, and I'm trying to work towards that end. Next, filtering down, here are those 5 medium-sized goals that will ultimately help accomplish those long-term goals. And lastly, here are 10 short-term goals that will break down those goals even further. So now when it comes to figuring out a balanced practice diet with all that information in mind, all I'm doing is using those 5 practice zones as a way of selecting and organizing my practice material to make sure that I'm dividing my time appropriately between all the things that I need to be doing. So for new material, towards that goal of expanding my repertoire, I'm working on 3 new tunes this week. I want to finally learn that back up and push tune, which I put off forever. I want to also learn the old time tune Molly Put the Kettle On, and a tricky one here called the Snowflake Reel. For developing material, I'm reviewing this killer 4-part tune called the Hangman's Reel, which I'm hoping to be teaching here on the channel and over on Patreon soon, as well as that classic bluegrass jam standard Long Journey Home. This week for performance material, I'm putting down the tune Cold Frosty Morning because it's a tune that I'm hoping to make a video lesson for this week. For technique, I'm working towards feeling more comfortable playing up the neck by using some position scales in the keys of D flat, F sharp, B, E, A, and D, and then I'm also working on the dominant 7th arpeggios up and down the neck too. And lastly, for musicianship, I'm devoting a good chunk of time towards composition every day. So that's what I'll be practicing this week, and I'll be practicing the same topics every day to make sure that I'm really making progress in these areas before moving on. Come Sunday, I'll regroup and reassess and see what new items I can add to the list and what old items I can take off. So if you haven't already, pause this video and come up with a plan like this for yourself. All right, so you've got your plan, but what does it look like to actually apply this plan to your day-to-day practice routine? And that's where time management comes in. And what I do is really simple. I just divide my practice time appropriately between all those items on my list, making sure that I focus more time on the stuff that needs more work. So for this week, I'll be doing 15 minutes on new material. I'll be doing 30 minutes on developing material because it takes me a little bit longer to come up with new ideas over fiddle tunes. For performance material, I'll be doing 15 minutes. Then I'll be doing 30 minutes on technique because I really want to build up that muscle memory for going further up the neck. And then I'll also be doing 30 minutes on composition because it takes me a little while to get into that creative zone. And then once I come up with a timetable like this, I just use an actual timer to keep myself accountable. Maybe some of you guys are cringing at how type A that sounds, but I can't say enough about how helpful it is to use a real timer when you're practicing like this, because as soon as you hit go on your timer, it's so much easier to lose yourself in whatever you're playing, right? You don't have to worry about spending too much time or too little time on the task at hand. You can just focus on the playing. But it's always important to stay flexible because maybe a few days into this practice plan this week, I'll realize, oh, I don't need to spend quite as much time on scales. Maybe I'll focus more on composition since that takes a little bit longer for me. You have to stay quick on your feet to make sure that you're adapting your plan to focus more time on the things that need more work, like we talked about. And my last tip on time management is to break up your topics into 15-minute chunks throughout your practice session. That way you're not practicing any one topic more than 15 minutes at a time, because I realize that my focus and my attention span starts to dwindle after that amount of time. And any work beyond that on one topic starts to become a little less effective and efficient. So it's going to be more productive in the long run to shift gears after 15 minutes on one thing and practice something completely different for another 15 minutes before coming back to that original topic if you need to work on it more. So with that additional structure, here's what my practice log looks like for today. Now at this point, you're rightly saying, this dude is totally full of it. There's no way that his practicing could be this thorough all the time. And you're totally right. There are some days where I just can't be bothered to stick to a schedule and I just practice whatever I want to, or I don't practice at all. And I think that's fine to have days like that. But it's just like anything else in life, right? You have to keep choosing to start and restart the habits that will help you do the things that you want to do. And I think I'm always better off for having a practice plan, even if I don't stick to it, because I can always come back to it and refocus and keep making progress towards the ends that I want to. Well, I hope at least some of that was helpful. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, I'd love to hear from you. Also, if you want to support the channel, I'd be so grateful if you check out my Patreon page at the link above. There's tons more learning resources for mandolin players there. Also, just subscribes and likes go so far to making these videos possible. So thank you for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.